Hey, folks, welcome to September 2023. This is early September, just got through Labor Day. I hope you all had a wonderful Labor Day here in the United States, at least, but we're just chugging along. The year will be out before we even know it. It's going to get really crazy in 2024. We have had an incredibly hot summer. I always kind of kvetch about that, but not a huge fan of the heat. I could hack it. I've been doing this for a long time, and the humidity is just like everybody says, the humidity is just completely oppressive. We've had so much of it, and we still probably at this moment that I speak have a bit more of it going into October. Usually it's like mid-October when everything breaks and we can get out there and really enjoy things. I hope to enjoy my front screen door and my back screen door I just had installed this year. So I hope to have this nice cross breeze. So hoping for that, hoping I can enjoy that and enjoy a lot of other things for a long period of time. I do enjoy being here in the southeastern United States. But here today, I have a wonderful guest. He's a solo pianist. His name is Matthew Mayer. I stumbled across him while listening to some solo piano music that my good friend Brian Stryker, it's not spelled Strikeer, it's Streicher. I believe that's German, Brian. We're going to have to talk about that. But Brian is a colleague of mine, and we'll have him on here one day. But I was listening to him, and he was in this playlist, Matthew Mayer's playlist. And I was like, I got to talk to Matthew. This is incredible. This is really wonderful how they have created this beautiful music and it's streamed all over the world. It's really wonderful stuff. And I'm always fascinated by musicians who play any type of instrument. I really am fascinated by lyricists and vocalists. They're just all magicians to me. So, and that's a huge reason why I'm even doing this podcast. It's my curiosity as to why I even want to get on here and talk with creatives of all types and some leaders and all kinds of other wonderful folks on here. Matthew is believe in Nebraska. I'm trying to remember. I just did this episode. And he grew up in South Dakota. And I never even met anybody from South Dakota. So always a great thing. It's just wonderful. I really enjoy doing this. And I enjoy the fact that you're listening to it. So here goes my chat with Matthew Mayer. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. It's Mr. Niebel, correct?
Right. Did I put my pronunciation in the email?
You
I always
did
have to do
great.
that.
You put the two E's in there, and I said, it's so helpful because I'm like, well, I want to make sure you always want to make sure you pronounce right. But can you hear me okay?
Yeah, very well. Yeah, with my last name, and some people do Nebel. There was once a radio, not a disc jockey, kind of like an Art Bell type conspiracy kind of radio show host. His name was Long John Nebel. He went by that. Ed McMahon from The Tonight Show was a big friend of his. And yeah, so certain people go with that shorty, but yeah, it sounds so wrong to me. It's almost cringeworthy when I'm called Nebel. I can like some people I let it go, but yeah, I put that in my emails to make sure
No,
that people
it's
get that.
great because I wrote it down on my notes. I purposely misspelled your last name Neebl, so it was like Mr. Niebel. I got it because I get my last name gets pronounced Meyer all the time, and it's Mayer. It's Mayer, and
Yeah, just like
I
John
get
Mayer,
it.
don't you think that would have
I would think, I don't know. So I totally get it, and I always appreciate when people put that in there. So it's very
cool.
nice to meet you over Zoom.
Yeah, great to meet you as well. I stumbled on you because I'm into a certain piano music as well. I mean, I like pop music and stuff like that. And if you looked at my podcast, I have people who are just of all different genres. So I like to get a variety in here, and I really appreciate it. And what you do. Piano music is just so calming and just such a nice thing to have in the background when you're doing anything. I just love that.
Well, I appreciate your invitation, and you're right. I've been checking out Tales from the Corner, and I really appreciate all the diversity of artists you have and creatives. And so, getting your invitation, it was a real pleasure. I have to ask you if you know a Brian Stryker at all.
Yes, that is how I know you because Brian.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Brian. I think the world of him.
Yeah.
I've been in dialogue. I wanted to make sure. I was like, wait a minute, Brian's at CNN, and I saw you, and I was like, that's awesome. And I have a ton of. I spent 2 years working at NBC's Access Hollywood in Burbank. That's where I started.
Oh,
Like
yeah, I did read that. Yeah,
that
yeah.
back in the early 2000s, and I'm the guy running around getting people like you newspapers and coffees and but I tell you what, if there's a grind on a day-to-day basis with field producers, segment producers, I have so much respect for what you all do I did it for 2 years before I really, put my focus and moved back to the Midwest, but that's another story. So I know the demands that you all have on a day-to-day basis. So kudos. And I'm so glad to make that connection with you and Brian.
Yeah, this is our with my podcast and Brian doing his music, and I've known him for decades. This is just a great creative outlet. Yeah, this for me, this started during the pandemic when a lot of
Nice.
artists were stuck at home. They couldn't do live concerts, and this just started happening with PR people contacting me because I had done some music production videos with CNN Airport Network, and that all ended. And these people were like, hey, can you do something with CNN with, well, it's like, no, I mean, we're definitely doing a lot of COVID coverage. We're
Yeah.
not doing music and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I thought this was a great outlet. So I've been doing it ever since. I think I'm coming up on my third year here doing this. So it's just
Outstanding.
yeah, and Brian, I noticed you were in his playlist. I mean, first of all, explain to us how you do these piano playlists because he gets
Absolutely.
very excited when he gets in people's playlists.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, you're right. When it comes to playlisting, I'll rewind a little bit. I have some playlists myself. As an independent artist, one of the best ways to get noticed or to get your music out there is through playlisting or getting on a playlist. And the reason for that, as you know, Bob, and as you've talked to many musicians, is the rollout of digital service providers, DSPs, also known as Spotify, Amazon, etc., has really lent this opportunity for what some people call passive listening. And what that is you might
Right,
be in a you're editing or whatever, and you want to wind down and you want to literally listen to I just want to listen to chill out music. And you can go to these DSPs and just type in chill out, and boom, you got a whole list of music. And so through the years, as these DSPs became pretty popular, and I would say they really started out, I mean, they've gone back years, but I'd say around 2015 or so, artists like us or like Brian or solo piano artists, we really try to also help each other, and we build these piano playlists that, like, piano in the background on Spotify has become very, very popular. I myself have never landed on that playlist, but you're right. If you get on a playlist with a lot of followers, your
right,
listening is going to automatically go up. They might not even know who you are as an artist, but they might say, "Oh, that's a cool song." Or right now, I one of my playlists is a solo piano playlist from a website that I curate. And Brian's song is the first one on there. He has a new single out. But getting added to playlists really helps you be introduced to other listeners. So the promotional game for independent artists is, I want to try to get on more playlists because that's automatically going to help me get introduced to new listeners.
yeah, yeah. And he sees like a lot of these stats. Brian's always telling me, "Oh, they're streaming me in Ukraine or
Yes.
Argentina." It's
Yes.
really fascinating.
100%. And DSPs like Spotify and Amazon, they have these portals for artists that, like, you have artists for Spotify. You can get on there and you can see in real time how many people are listening to you, where they're listening from. Amazon does a great job of that as well. You're going to start to see that with Tidal now. You're going to start to see that with Apple Music. Apple Music does that. I don't know if Apple Music does the real time, but you're right. You start to dive in, and it's kind of exciting to see, especially as an independent artist. Oh, someone like you said in Ukraine is listening to this. That's cool. And they're getting so good with data now that they're starting to kind of group your listeners into super listeners, or they're calling them super fans, like on Amazon, where these are people that they proactively search for your music. So then you get a better idea. Is my audience purely just from they're listening to a playlist, or are they kind of starting to get to know me as an artist a little bit? So you're right. It's that the data and all the tools that are coming out for independent artists is quite exciting.
Yeah, yeah. How has it been for your solo career? Have you seen like an increase in streaming and sales? And your solo career kind of goes back a ways too, as I was noticing.
Yeah. I started in 1999. That's when my first
Mhm.
CD was released. And I recorded in 1998, my first song, or my first album. And so over the years, it has naturally gone up for me. I am definitely not a Cinderella story by any means. I give talks and I tell people my timeline is almost one of more of failure than it is success. And what I mean by that is I think in this day and age, there is this tendency to really want that overnight. Okay, I'm going to come out with a couple albums and I'm gonna blow up. And what I try to craft is saying you have to have a long-term outlook on this. And so, just going back, I'm from South Dakota, very small town in South Dakota. The solo piano world in South Dakota in 1998 was not a very booming world. So there wasn't a lot of marketing. There wasn't really anything, and you figured it out. But back to your question, the numbers have just kind of slow and steady over the years gone in the right direction, thankfully. But again, playlists have helped that. My hometown, just my area I live in Omaha, Nebraska now, but in the Midwest, they've really been supportive of me as an artist. And so having a strong home base combined with uh, the Spotify's, the playlisting helping out, just over time consistently it's gone up. But I've never landed on the big piano in the background or anything like that, so which is fine with me, because that could happen for some artists and then they drop off of it and they might not see any other success if that's your only strategy. So you'll have to pardon me if I go off on all sorts of
That's
tangents, because
fine.
I could
That's what we
talk
do.
about this for 24 hours, Bob, and then you're going to be like, I'm not going to have this guy on the show again because all he does is talk. So I'm just going
Oh,
to
that's fine. That's fine. This is like
stop.
the non sequitur hour. It's like we just like free flow. I can't stand that kind of structure. You know how it is like with late night talk shows. It's like I want to do
Yeah,
something different here. It's
right.
like, this working in TV and all this, but like the late nights, and I haven't been on those shows, but what I understand is it's so prepared. There's such a staff there and it's so canned. So I like to be kind of natural and free
I
flowing.
love it. I
So
love it.
going to this now, how did your family end up in South Dakota? For somebody who I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, I went to another
Nice.
metropolis, Atlanta, Georgia, many moons ago. How did your family end up in South Dakota?
Yeah, so that's where I was. So I was born in Mitchell, South Dakota, which is the home of the world's only Corn Palace.
There you
So
go. We
there
learned
you
something
go. I
new.
wasn't born in the Corn Palace, but it was about 4 blocks away at St. Joseph Hospital. But the
Wow.
history, I've done a little bit of history of my family, and really we have a German history that in the 1800s had migrated over in parts of Russia, and that part of Germans out of Russia, it was around the Crimea area, had settled in that southeastern part of South Dakota. And over those years, that's kind of where my family had grown up. Born in Mitchell, but my dad managed the bank in a really small town called Canastota. It's still there. It's about a town of 700 people. My high school graduating class was 13 people. And I tell people I graduated third out of my class, Bob, but I just don't tell them how many. So I just said I graduated third.
That's wild.
I wasn't even the top 10%, but I said it's not important. I graduated third out of my class.
So in
Uh,
Canastota, you've stumbled on piano.
yes,
You're about
yes.
12.
And yeah, at 12, right across the street lived from me a piano teacher. His name was Art Cooper, and he was the town pastor, but he was just a great human being. And around that time, around 12 years old, is usually especially boys at that age, piano's not cool. Music starts to kind of not get cool because you're starting to get it, especially boys, they're starting to quit piano lessons. And at that
Right.
time, I would see my friends quitting piano and I'd be like, I want to take piano. Like, this looks really cool.
Right.
And I had this teacher that literally lived right across the street from me, that he would take a song and I would, like, let's say I was learning Mary Had a Little Lamb or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. I would play it and then he would sit down and then he would like expand it and use like every key on the piano on this one song. And I'd be like, whoa, like it was
Right.
kind of my introduction into you can make something your own.
Hmm.
And he really pushed me hard. He started me out in ragtime pieces that I still play today and those things. But I was fortunate in those formative years to have a teacher that didn't put a lid on you. That kind of he was a disciplinarian, but in a way that could kind of introduce you to exploring it rather than just tapping it on. So
Yeah. So there was your road to going through school. It was always like where I grew up. It's like the guitar was the macho. That's what the real guys get into. If you're going to get into music, piano is considered. Oh, back in the 70s, it was like, considered, yeah, that's more feminine. So I
right,
think that's what, a lot of guys were like, no, I want to get into the guitar and start my garage band, man. But it's just like that's totally changed. And thanks to some popular artists in rock music who made the piano the central thing. It's like, no, a guy could pound away on a piano, throw the stool, and put on a
right.
good show. And there is a macho thing there if you really wanted to have it. So going through school, did you play? I understand you started like playing live at like a chiropractic clinic.
Yeah, man. I really appreciate this interview because I really appreciate you doing some research on
Yeah.
this, and it
Yeah.
brings a smile to my face because my first gigs were in the hall of the Ortman Clinic. Is a chiropractic clinic in our town. It's really kind of the center of what really made Canastota. It's got a great history. It's really cool to look at. But I would do started doing just one man piano shows every Wednesday in the waiting room of the Ortman Clinic. And sometimes it was like a packed house was probably 25 people. That's a big night.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. There was a show that I walked out and there was two people there. It was just two. And I still did the hour-long show and still told my corny jokes and still walked around, and it was an old upright. And so that's where I cut my teeth and really, performance and the importance of interacting with the crowd. And it was funny because I still get just as nervous today when I perform that I did when I was sitting in one of the doctor's rooms getting ready for the big show, putting the lavalier mic on. And I just said, oh boy, I wonder how many people we're going to get today, and most of those shows were just free. There was, in every once in a while, doctors would come and say, okay, let's pass the hat, which was fun. But that's where it all started. And that's where, those are really special years because that's kind of where it all began, was in that waiting room there.
So live performing, since you've been doing it since then, do you do it quite a bit? What's the frequency of how much performing you
Yeah,
do? Now you're in Nebraska.
it really is slowed down since COVID. I tried to do, a big thing in our world is house concerts. So I was trying to do about at least 5 or 6 house concerts a year because I also balance this all with a day job as well. And so doing that, um, and so after COVID, it really went down. And I'm very particular. So the last tour I did was in Croatia. I just got back about
Hmm.
3 weeks ago. Did a 3-city tour there with Mate Mestrovic. So I've done 3 tours in Croatia. I've done. I have kind of a different approach in how and when I perform live. I really cherry pick things that are going to be special, but also I've done everything from performing in weddings and funerals and you name it, to having the luxury of going across seas and performing with really major artists, and ones that I'm lucky to even be on the same stage with, but opening for them. And I call myself the appetizer over there because I open for some really phenomenal people. So it has slowed down a little bit, but I would say also the strategy of getting your music has been so where you don't need to spend all that money in renting these big venues, when you have these DSPs that really, especially in the piano world, really help you get your music out there. But I do hope in the next couple of years to really get those live performance numbers back up, because that's my favorite. I absolutely love performing and telling stories and telling corny jokes,
Yeah.
and people that know me sit there and wince and say, Matt, don't say this joke, and I do. And so I mean, I'm corny
Nothing wrong
that
with that.
way, and that's I do miss that. But yeah, it's starting to pick back up again. So
That's great. Who did you listen to when you were growing up?
oh, it was George Winston for sure. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
George Winston. It was the first probably piano that I ever heard on AM FM radio in my car, and I just thought, wow. I His song Thanksgiving, to me, is it's the Linus and Lucy of my life. It's just I it's hard to explain when something inspires you, at that formidable age. It just
Sure.
takes you in. Um, it's
Yeah.
probably like in 1981 when you and Dan were making film,
Yeah, I did
and
my research.
teenagers in
Yeah.
filmmaking, and
Yeah.
it's just there's an
Right.
excitement about it, and
Yeah, yeah.
and you branch off that. So it'd definitely be George Winston for sure.
Yeah, that's true. And I was 12 years old when I started making independent Super 8 films. Did
That's
that all the way
awesome.
through adolescence, and that's what you're referring to. And we were on that show PM Magazine
Yeah, I
in
saw that.
81. Um, yeah, that was a very, very big thing at that moment because, cable was very, very new. A lot of people weren't wired up with cable TV at that time. So, the numbers were pretty good for shows like that. And then they had repeated it about a year later. So that kind of got our creative juices flowing. And we kept doing it. And it gave us this mojo. And we were in newspapers and kind of like, I mean, we're like, really, really popular, but it really inspired us. And so, growing up, we really liked Steven Spielberg, your George Lucas's. So we did some sci-fi things, and comedy was kind of was close to our hearts. We used to, like, Dan and I used to reenact like Carol Burnett kind of sketches or make our own sketches. I wish we had recorded a lot of that stuff, but with Super 8 film back then, and the way that technology was, you only had 3 minutes, 21 seconds per cartridge. So, which kind of got pricey in those days. So you were very limited, but you were disciplined as well. Nowadays, and this is in the music world too. Nowadays, everybody could do this.
Yeah,
Everybody's,
yeah,
has video equipment at home and they could easily distribute. And we couldn't do that
right.
back then. So I'm sure that's how it's been in the music world for you. Your first album, Crossing the Bridge, I'm sure was recorded radically different from how things are being done today, I'm sure.
Oh my gosh, 100%. Um, and the costs at the time, I cashed in all the savings bonds I had, and just every penny I had went to those first run of 1,000 CDs. And yeah, I mean, back then it was, I was still living in South Dakota, but I found a recording studio in Omaha, Nebraska, Warehouse Productions. They were great. They had recorded some of Mannheim Steamrollers stuff that came out of here. And And of course, the first time walking into a studio, I thought, oh my gosh, like the goosebumps that covered your body when you saw these records on the wall. You're like, whoa, this is amazing.
Isn't that,
And,
yeah.
and I just honestly, Bob, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I didn't know what an engineer was. I didn't know that there had to be someone there to kind of look at levels, and I had none of that. I just had an upright piano, and it's so interesting looking back when you ask that question, because it's such a walk of faith at that time, but you don't know it because you're just so excited to be doing it. And
Right.
B, you're putting yourself in the moment, and you're not thinking about, okay, so for example, then when I first got my first bill of, oh, okay, this is going to cost whatever, 100 some dollars an hour to record. To your point, I've got to be disciplined. Okay, what does this mean? I I was lucky to have a pretty good engineer at the time that kind of helped me out. Oh, I need to get a master CD, and that costs it. Oh, okay. Oh, now I got to design a cover. Well, how do I do that in the late 90s? There's this place called Graphic Speed in Sioux Falls that does CMYK film to make sure a photograph gets transferred over graphically.
Wow.
And to your point, now you just take a picture on your iPhone and there you go. And then you can put it on canva.com and put a title on it and there you go. But oh, I didn't know that was going to be $1,700 on top of the how many thousands I just record. Oh, wait, we got to find a manufacturer for this now. What did the manufacturer
Wow.
specs want? They don't want CMYK, they want RBG, they want this, they want that. And I mean, I would literally go into these productions like Graphic Speed, which is no longer there, but they were a big printing company, and I'd be walking around. I just turned 20 years old at the time. And so these guys have to be look. I mean, that I'm a
Yeah.
kid. So these guys have to be looking like, what is this kid? What he's gonna
Right.
have this. And especially in South Dakota when there wasn't really a lot of people printing out 1,000 CDs. And
Yeah.
so the other thing I'm grateful for in that is um my parents kind of let me fall when I fell, but they also never said, okay, you can't do this. And I think that's huge. That was huge. And so I just went step by step by step. And I had some student loan money. I put all that to the CDs. And so the final bill on that, back to your question, Bob, is considerably more than what a final bill is now, where a lot of artists don't a lot of artists now, including me on some releases, don't even physically print CD anymore. Um, just because it's so, just for the cost effectiveness of it, it's become this kind of paradoxical thing where you're right, anyone can do it now, but that has also clouded up the market in a way, not necessarily just assuming that anyone that can do it is not talented. It's
Right.
just that there's just a lot more noise out there to wade through to get your music out. So it's really changed, as you know. Like but I have to go back to that I really enjoyed watching that Teenage and Filmmaker, because they asked you the question. I think it was you. They asked, well, how do you do these special effects? And I think you said, well, it's not that hard. You just take a sheet, you poke some holes in it, and that's the sun. And then I was like, that is so cool. That's the way it should be, man.
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of those ideas from this magazine called Super 8 Filmmaker. I think that's where Dan and I would get a lot of ideas from. And it was just like it was true homemade, very organic. This is how you do it. There's no technology doing that. Obviously, it showed, but it showed a lot of creativity and imagination. And I kind of do feel sorry for, kids these days because so much is done for you. And now as we head more into the AI world, I mean, more and more this is going to become more automated. So where
You
where does
probably
that
see
create
that
it?
exactly. You probably see the exact same thing, because at that time too, as a kid, you're inspired. Like you're like, this is just fun. Okay, do you think mom's gonna let us poke holes in this sheet? Okay, great. Let's
Right.
poke holes in this sheet. Okay, let's make sure, the living room's up now in a movie set. And I mean, how cool is that? I mean, you're right. Like that's those are the things I think that as we get into the digital age, that the hands-on part of that was, um, missing now.
Yeah, it
So
really is. I mean, I have so many stories. One time I tinfoiled like half my basement to make a set. We
yes.
we did a movie called The Moronic Martians, and I was just inspired to do that. I took like old calendar pages and like built a wall with that, and I was up till like 2 in the morning
Man,
watching Tom Snyder. My kid was watching Tom Snyder at 14 years
I
old.
love it. And your mom's probably like, do not put a microwave down there. We do not want to blow the house up.
Yeah, all
That is
these
so awesome.
stories. My
That
friends,
is so
yeah,
good.
my friend Dan's house was like a fun house because I mean they were really like let us do what we wanted. Actually, that house doesn't even stand anymore. I don't know if they ripped it down because of us now. It was
So
it's
funny.
just it's just so funny and we had great memories. And nowadays it's like I don't know. You got to let kids be more free range. I tried doing that with my daughter more so, but always surrounded by like everything's got to be structured. These kids have got to be in all these different activities. It's like they have no free
100%.
time.
100%. I've got three kids of my own. And even even in the olden days, where I'm from, you rode your bikes till it was dark and you
Hmm.
knew where everyone was at with the bikes that were in the front yard. And here it's changed because you almost have to drive your kids to a play date, or got to drive them to a house. And I'm like, my parents never drove me anywhere. It was on a bike, and I just went wherever I wanted to go. And those were amazing. Amazing. It's like you don't realize how magical it was at the time. You
Yeah.
know,
It was just
and
totally normal. My
it
mother,
was
they didn't know
totally
where I
normal.
was.
It was totally normal.
She totally trusted me. She knew I was always down at Dan's house. Didn't really have, this, I wasn't in the in crowd, didn't have like a zillion friends. So it's
He
like she knew where
had
I
he
was.
had four things of saran wrap under his arm on his bike. We don't know what
Yeah.
he was doing, but we know he's at Dan's house
Yeah,
to see at
exactly.
night.
And now yeah, I know they had it easy, didn't they? Compared to what's the pressures are of today and what kids are
Yeah.
going through. And then you
Oh,
talk about music. I did a story, and if you maybe I'll even send you the link. I did a
yeah,
story on a guy who makes cigar box guitars.
yeah.
And it's a really
That's cool.
fascinating story. This guy is so cool and does it totally from scratch because he's very, very handy. But what I did in researching the story, find out, and one of my friends, his name's Jeff Georgiadis. I'll give a shout out to him because he's into guitar and everything. He says, guitar sales and things like that and learning guitar have really declined because kids just aren't as interested in learning music like they used to. So places like Guitar Center have become fewer and far between. And I'm sure it's that way when you're talking about with keyboard and piano. I would think that's kind of depressing in a way, but I hope kids are really taking up piano still.
I hope you're right that the trend will go up. And absolutely. Like the thing about a piano too, it's heavy. You can't just put it in a house so easy, and
Yeah.
and so you've really seen this. You've also seen this transition from these real acoustic upright big pianos to, I have a right behind me. I have a Yamaha Clavinova keyboard here that I play because it's easy to, you know, I don't record here, but I do a lot of my practicing here. And then when I record, I'll go to a professional studio. But when you talk about that evolution of people getting into music, even the instruments are changing. I mean, from, um, a lot more electronic, a lot more. But I hope that kids will always gravitate towards music and the arts. And um, I hope that they will see the magic of getting your fingers calloused playing a guitar and the physicality of that, or pushing a note that hits a hammer, that hits a string that vibrates, but you control that, as opposed to touching the screen and
Yeah, and having
making
it doing it
something
all.
happen. It's flat. It's not. It can be emotional, but it's not. There's a physicality. It's kind of like in, I heard an author say this about writing and the magic of what it was like to pick up a pen or a pencil and have your wrist kind of cramp up a little bit when you're really into a story and you're really into it, and that inspiration, um that I hope is not lost in all this technology.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I hope kids will see the wholeness of the arts in that.
Yeah. So when you go into the studio, do you do improvisation with your music? How do you come up with your melodies and all that? Is you just go to your upright there and just start working on it? How does the music come to you and your original compositions?
I've done both, and the older I get, the more I gravitate towards what you said about being. I try to be even more open and more open and more open and less structured. I of course always have a structure of a song going into it. I haven't, it might be an ABCBA form, or I might I know the chords, but a lot of songs that I've recorded as I get older are songs that I really try to invite the moment in. And the challenge when you record solo piano in a studio, it can be so stressful because you're trying to get this perfect sound, you're trying to be technical. To your point, you're under the gun on a hourly rate,
Mhm.
and you almost have to remove all that and be like, okay, I try to have a backbone of a song or get ready, and then I try to let that moment come in. Um, I fail all the time in the studio of what I don't want, but I've also tried to give myself grace, and I tell other musicians too, is a lot of songs you hear of mine are not, they're not perfect. You probably can hear a wrong note here and there, but I'm not one that goes and re-edits 1,000 times. If I felt it in that take, I say we're good. That's the one that's going out. Some people don't agree with that, and that's totally fine. Some people would be like, why would you do that? Of course, I edit I mean, as you know, in TV, editing is the most powerful tool. You can tell any
Mhm.
story or you can create anything with editing. But if you listen to that for, if you listen to the first CD I ever put out, I mean, there's mistakes in there and whatever. But um, I read Rick Rubin's book. I think it's titled The Creative Way. It's been about 6 months or so, but he really talks about. There's so many good things in that, and you compare that with another book by Pressfield called The War of Art,
Hmm.
and um, creativity is such a hard thing to explain. It's such a hard thing to categorize. It's different for everybody, and you've got to find what works for you, and even that changes over the years. And so for me, I try to get a good understanding of where I'm at with a song, and many times I'll go into that studio and I'm nervous because I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I just have faith that it'll come. So
Yeah, that's a big difference, probably going into the studio versus actually producing at home where you don't have that audience and other people. You're just kind of one on one. This kind of reminds me of that other episode I did. I spoke with this author, Warren Zanes, who wrote a whole book about Bruce Springsteen putting together the Nebraska album, which
yes,
he didn't know he
that's
was
right.
making an album. He had a TIAC. I don't know if you know the whole story behind that, but it's
Wasn't
listen,
he was that the one where he was in a bedroom or something
yeah,
forever or something
yeah.
like it was crazy. It's crazy. Like that had to be a fun interview.
It really was. It was fascinating, and I'm so glad I read the book because it just goes into detail about how all that happened. And he was just going through this depressing period, and he was renting this house in New Jersey, and there was this bedroom, and years later they both went in there and actually visited it. But it was done on this TIAC recorder, this which took cassette tapes. It was like the first of its kind. It was $800. I was like, oh my gosh, $800 was a lot to be back in 1981, but like
Yes.
not so bad for Bruce Springsteen at that time. But he didn't know he was making anything, and they tried recreating that in the studio when he was doing his
Right.
next album, and they were like, no, the magic isn't there. This is very magical. We're just going to release this as is, not the highest quality recording. But it's magic. That's when we're talking about the creative process. Like you can't recreate that in the studio. So he's just a
A
really
hundred
fascinating
percent.
story.
That's such a great example. That's a perfect example what you just said there, Bob. It's these moments that happen. Um, I had the opportunity to interview George Winston once,
Oh, cool.
and he said that this, I told him about the inspiration of Thanksgiving. And to your point, he said Thanksgiving was just, it was at the time, he was just making something up in the studio and it just, okay, let's do this. And he's like, all right, we'll just go with that. And that's arguably one of his most famous songs. But yes, that story with Bruce Springsteen, what a great example. Because you're right, they also did. I think I remember also seeing the televised version where they went back to that room and they
Right.
showed that recorder that you're
Yeah,
talking about.
exactly.
And, you know, and in this day and age, you just think you always need the best thing. You think you always need the most expensive. I mean, this Clavinova, which I've done some recording on, this is a 23-year-old Clavinova. Like,
Amazing.
I don't have the most prestige. I don't even have a baby grand piano, you know? And so when I look at people that have the best instruments, of course there's some envy there, but it's so you do the best with what you have, you know? That's at the end of the day, and you figure it out and you make it work. But I'll have to rewatch that again because I remember watching that story on Bruce Springsteen. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
The stories behind the music sometimes are just almost as unbelievable as some of the great things that come out of it.
Yeah, very organic as well. And, growing up, our big thing was, and we always joked about it, was like, tinfoil and duct tape. It's all we needed, really. It's just like, and your imagination just runs wild from there, and you're not using the most expensive equipment. And
Right.
yeah, and you catch that. You can't catch that lightning in a bottle again. I think it only happens once, and that's a great example. I think, when talking about George Winston, I think Brian Stryker.
He did.
He did Was it him who did the story? I think if
I
you go to
think he did a
Brian,
story, yeah, with Mr. Winston like years ago.
yeah, I
And
think he has that up on his website. I think it's brianstryker.com to give him a little plug.
yes,
I got to
shout
get
out to
Brian.
Brian.
Yeah.
Follow Brian's music, and I tell you, I just can't say enough about him with not only his music, but the way in which he. And I told this to Brian the other day. It's so full circle that we're having this interview and we're talking about him because um, I told him I really appreciate how he's so kind. He's always he helps me out when I'm not even asking, and I want to help him out. And those are the kind of people you kind of get in your circle. As he always approaches so gentlemanly, and his history is great. And so yeah, please follow Brian Stryker's music and help him out and keep streaming his stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And as yours as well, and all the other artists. So how many artists? Yeah, I was kind of reading about it. How many artists are in the playlist? It's like in the hundreds, isn't it?
Yeah. So in my my playlist I have on Spotify, it's from solopiano.com. I run a website called solopiano.com. I've run it since 2000 is when I bought that domain name. But we have over 600 artists from around the world that can build their own solo piano page for free. Everything's free on solopiano.com. We offer some things that are marketing if they want to, but and then what I try to do is as many as I can is take those artists and add them to our solopiano.com official playlist on Spotify. So there's a huge the great thing with solo piano music or instrumental music is there's no language barrier, right? So doesn't matter if you're in China, in India, in South America, it sounds the same wherever you're at. And so it's really been fun to get to. That's how I've gotten to know Brian. That's how I've gotten to know Mate Mestrovic out of Croatia and do shows with him. It's all been through solopiano.com and trying to help others. And, people have helped me and, it's kind of become, it's a community. So
you're pretty big in Croatia, then. You must have
uh,
have a following there.
I'm not big in Croatia, but Mate is big. Mate is
Yeah,
big in
good
Croatia.
to do.
Mate
Yeah,
Mestrovic. He's kind of their star there. But yeah,
cool.
I joke. I'm his opener, and he's a phenomenal guy, phenomenal musician. He writes for a lot of independent films. He's done a tremendous job of doing classical crossover, of taking classical music and crossovering it into all sorts of different genres. And he's produced people like Maxim, who's huge over Maxim is a huge classical artist, classical crossover artist there sees and works with people like that. So yeah, he's quite something and just a great guy. But like I said, I feel lucky just even to be around some of these people.
Yeah.
So
Wow. You have a great body of work. Your catalog is what you've got 17 solo albums now.
got about 17 albums out, yeah. And I just a new single release today called Swing. And I just try to keep releasing more uh like I said, it's just little step by little step for, I don't know, 20 some years. I mean, you know him probably, so well, Bob, because you've been around this creativity and television and all of the artists that you've interviewed. Like it's such a it's a journey more than it is, anything else. There's always these extreme examples of stars, and they deserve what they get, and they've worked hard, and they've, but a lot of people, as I mentioned, I have a day job too, and that I've had for all these years that I use to supplement this. So
Yeah, especially with a family, you got to pay the bills. So it's like, the dream really always is, yeah, it'd be great to make it full time, but you get to a point in life, it's like you have all these responsibilities. It's like, yeah, nice paycheck and benefits. That's really nice to have. So instead of going out there kind of busking in a way, so it definitely, you have to come back. It does keep it real, that's for sure.
well, to your point too, with bills and family, like um I've given this talk before on being an artist with a 9 to 5 job, and there's so many benefits to it too. There's so many benefits of, like you said, having the benefits of a day job, having the salary of a day job, that it takes also away a lot of stress from a creative perspective.
Sure.
To your point, busking it and having to go out there to survive as an artist, that can be tremendously stressful. I've
Yeah.
had those periods where I've done art 100% of the time when I didn't have a job, and that's tough. Like
Yeah.
that's a different stress. Yes, I think there's a romantic thought of I would have all this time to be creative, but I know I know how undisciplined I can be sometimes if I've got just 10 hours of creative time and like, wait, am I really? But then I find out sometimes the more I have, the more productive I can be. And if I can compartmentalize and I think you're a great example, working, what you do is you're 8 to 5, or maybe it's 6 to 9. I mean, of a lot more hours. I
These days,
know,
it's lots of weekends. I'm not complaining, guys.
I
If
know
anybody
how
there's
hard you got.
watching.
I'm serious, man. With 2 years, I've seen it. Like I know
Yeah,
how hard you guys work, and so you do that, and then you still take time to do these passion projects.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Well,
wonderful. I think
it
that's
kind
just
of,
awesome.
it's funny because it kind of helps me as a storyteller. And I've been explaining this to people at work because, it's funny, like Gen X and older, it's like people look at your outside activity like, oh, you're moonlighting. Oh my, what? Yeah. What? Don't you care about your day? It's like, I love my day job. I've been there many moons. I love it. It's just like, this is a great thing. And it also complements what I do at the day job is building something, asking questions, putting together a story. That's what I love doing. So I think it's, if anything, it helps quite a bit. So they know I'm doing this. So it's like I'm not making a dime on this. So yeah, it's just a passion thing. I really love doing it.
Well, to your point of not making a dime on it, that's a great point too, because I think people sometimes, it's such an interesting thing. Because I also, when you whispered in there, they know I'm doing this.
Exactly.
I
Oh my
think
God.
there's
What?
Yes, I think there's a fear. There was for me initially of, I don't want my day job to know that I'm just so passionate about this and I'm doing these shows. And because if it starts working too well, they might think, well, how engaged really are you at your day job? You
Right.
know, like, are you sure? Is this what you really? And it's like, wait a minute here. We're whole people. You know,
Uh-huh.
there's more than I can do just at my day job, and I'm lucky because they've been so great and they
Yeah.
champion what I do outside of work. But you're right. In the beginning, there's kind of this fear of, well, I don't really want to talk about it much because
Exactly. Yeah.
it's going to take away maybe some credit. Or as an artist, if I'm in my artist circles, I don't really want to talk about that I've got a 9 to 5 much, because then they might think, well, maybe he's not professional. Well,
Right.
why isn't he doing it full time? Like, all professionals have more than what they do on stage. They're running businesses. They're doing, like, how are they
Right.
making their big bucks? It's not just performing. They're doing a lot of other things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, I hope that dialogue, and I think it is changing, but I hope that dialogue continues to change more of
Yeah.
approaching your life in a holistic perspective, as opposed to, nope, Bob is just, this person in his day job and that's it. Well, no, you're a lot more than that. And I hope I'm a lot more than just my
Yeah.
person, my day job. And I also hope I'm more than just a piano player, you
Yeah.
know? I
Yeah.
hope
Yeah.
I'm, you know, able to do all these things, and we're able to do all these things, and you never know what it's going to branch out to. That's the fun of it.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of it is also like, yeah, you're talking about these perform. It's not just performing. I mean, they get into merch, and that's very
Yeah.
big too. And it's doing
Yes.
all this other stuff. So, yeah, many, many years ago, and I still kind of do it occasionally. I was doing a lot of freelance writing. In fact, I did a travel column. And, that was also something that's like I tried keeping it very, very separate. It's like I'm not getting any money off that either. It's
Yeah.
like I'm not rolling in the dough here. So it's like you got to really, really just I try to keep the world separate in a way, but then again, I think they complement each other, and that's kind of hard to explain to somebody who's older and in these older generations. I just think there's still a lot of people out there who feel like, oh, if you're with the same job, you're gonna, you do well, by golly, you're gonna retire with the gold watch.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen so much anymore.
Right. Right. Well, this is a subject all in itself, what you're talking about, Bob, and it's so intriguing to hear your insights into that, because you're living it too. Like, solopiano.com, I tell people, you want to know how much I've made on it? $0. I've owned it for 23 years. I'm the worst businessman probably in history. I made $0 on it, but it's given me relationships that I would never even dream of.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's opened these other doors that you can't put on a dollar, or it's opened other doors that may lead to dollars someday. But when you approach it differently, to your point, is these passion projects, they fill another bucket, or they fill a bucket for me. But they also lead to other things that you can't plan. They lead to these, almost that magical moment that you were talking about in the studio.
yeah,
That happens in interactions. It happens in friendships. It happens in, I would have never planned in my life that I'd be talking to Mr. Nebel right now on
hmm,
Tales from the Corner, but that was because of Brian, and Brian was
right,
because of solopiano.com, and solopiano.com, hasn't made, but it's like, wait, well, this is cool. Okay, what might come out of this conversation, or what might come out of it for someone else that might listen to this conversation? And it's like, whoa, all these
yeah.
all these different chain reactions that can. I just watched Oppenheimer too, so the chain
Oh
reactions
my
just fits
gosh.
perfectly into this of what we're talking about. It can spread to other things. So
I don't know if
yeah,
I can
wow.
justify the cost of going to an IMAX of that. Just for a movie, I'm like, I heard there's scalpers. My girlfriend was telling me this. There were scalpers and people like reselling tickets to get to a movie like that. That is amazing and great for the studio. Universal's done great. And folks who've gone to see Barbie, because these are the two
Yeah.
hot tickets of the summer of 2023 here. Got to give Barbie a plug because that's part of the company I'm currently, I believe I'm working for. I get tossed around like a
Yeah.
hot potato. So yeah, I mean that is fascinating. I'm sure Oppenheimer, and I'm sure there's probably a good deal of music in that too. I would imagine.
There is there it's I tell you what though, I was really, so I spent the extra bucks to do the IMAX, and I'm not like, I don't go to movies all the time. But every time I go, I'm like, whoa, I forget how cool it is to go to a good movie. And
Yeah, I don't go
the
much.
music obviously was great. Just the effects that they used, and you would probably know a heck of a lot more about, what did they use, 35 millimeter, 70 millimeter, whatever cameras, and up close face shots, and
It's
something
70
just
millimeter
totally kind of blew me
IMAX.
out of my seat. And
Yeah.
but the storyline again is pretty, it's pretty remarkable. I mean,
Hmm.
um, I can't imagine. There's so many things that I I actually saw it twice, so I'm kind of embarrassed
Oh,
to say, but
cool.
I've
I
seen,
gotta
yeah, I
go.
just, every once in a while, it's like a good fast food joint you hit, and then you hit it for like 2 weeks, and then you're like, okay, I'm done with Taco Bell. I got to move on to Taco John's now. So
Yeah, and I was always like thinking like is there a lot of work for like artists like yourself to work in film, TV, that kind of thing to score things, or is that just a tough racket to get into as well? I
well,
don't really like to push it with Brian too much, but I'm like, you're kind of at that age. I mean, you're not going to be, the big pop star that you might have thought you were ever going to be, but you could get work in, soundtracks. I know that that's a huge deal as you get older.
absolutely, mechanical licenses. I mean, it's a big world there, and it's like anything, right? It's like, getting into that world. You continue to pitch to,
Yeah.
licensing agents, and get into the libraries, but also it obviously helps to have a relationship into some of these places. And um, I don't have deep relationships into licensing. I hope to get more relationships into licensing, because that's a great income stream for people, that can get in there. um, you just keep chipping away at it. But it is a great opportunity for independent artists. For big film scores, that's obviously I mean, it's competitive, very challenging to get into. But it can be done. And you know eh, you just keep chipping away, and introducing yourself, and keep getting your music out there. So
Neat, neat. Well, I appreciate you stopping by. And where can we see your music? And you got your own website as well?
yeah, it's just matthewmayer.com, MATTHEWMAYER.com. And then you can search Matthew Mayer on, Spotify, Amazon. Always appreciate if you stream. I've got a trending song right now on Instagram called When Flowers Grew Wild. So if you search in the audio of Instagram, a lot of people are leaving that. But I really appreciate, Bob, you taking your time, to chat with me, to
Absolutely.
reach out. I've really, really enjoyed chatting with you, and really
Yeah.
appreciate you taking your energy and your time to do this. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for stopping by. And hopefully we'll do it again in a couple of years or maybe a year or so as
Absolutely.
I keep this thing going, hopefully.
Yeah, you've got a lot of. So how many people have you interviewed?
We're over 100 now. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I'm over
you
100.
you've got
Yeah.
a lot of people on there. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah. Check it out, talesfromthecorners.com. You could also download TFTC with Bob Nebel wherever you get the
awesome.
podcast. I think I'm on every platform. Stitcher went away. That's one
I didn't know
platform that
that.
went away. Yeah, Stitcher closed down, so I don't advertise that anymore. But Apple Podcasts is probably the bigger place.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be sharing this out as well, and getting people to come check your interviews out. It's great. It was a lot of fun.
Good deal. Take care and best wishes in all of your pursuits.
Hey, thanks a lot, Bob. I appreciate it.
This was a great talk, and I hope to have more like it. Just really easygoing. Great guy, great talented guy. Like I said, I'm so flattered that he did research on me as well as I do on everybody who I have on here. I got to know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, somebody writes a book, I'm gonna read that sucker. Yeah, and I have. Scout's honor. I've done that every time. I don't know how anybody can do it without doing that and doing the research. You got to know what you're talking about. So thanks for stopping in. Hopefully, more to come from the corners here and my little corner of the world to yours. and have a good one. Hopefully, we're going to see fall here pretty soon all across the country. We need that relief. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.